Welcome to Mountains Made Low, where we help our listeners to encounter the love of God and live well in the modern world. I'm Dennis Mueller.
And I'm Christine Reagan.
And with us today, I'm going to let Christine do the intro because we have a special guest today. And I think Christine knows this individual a little bit better than me.
Working on 35 years of knowing him. We have Dr. Robert Hall with us. He's a musician. He is a psychiatrist. He's a deacon within the Archdiocese of Philadelphia here. And he's also my dad. So thanks for being here.
I'm very happy to be here. It's great to work with both of you. I've listened to your podcasts online. They're wonderful. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about this unique subject today.
This is like Bring Your Dad to Work Day. This is like a modified version, which we've done before. I've brought you in a few times to speak to my classes.
Oh, sure, yeah.
At the university that I teach. So this doesn't feel too different, but we're eager to hear what you have to say about this topic that we're going to address today, which is faith and mental health. And we think you would have certainly a unique perspective on that in your experience working in the church, your experience working with, within the mental health field. So I thought we would start with you just sharing how you got to do what it is that you do on a regular basis.
Sure.
Kind of give us the abridged life story, perhaps.
The abridged life story. Okay, fine. So I'm from Philadelphia. I'm from North Philadelphia, which is right in the heart of the action there nowadays. I'm in the part of North Philadelphia called Logan, which had a lot of interesting history there and going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, although nobody ever talked about it as I grew up there. I learned only later that George Washington housed his troops on one of the grounds of one of the local playgrounds, as did one of the British generals, just before the Battle of Germantown. We just played ball in that field, but by the time, they only cared about the Second World War, I guess, after I was born, and didn't care about the Revolutionary War anymore. But it's a very historic area. It's where LaSalle College is and Einstein Medical Center and that sort of thing.
That's where I went to college.
You went to LaSalle.
Okay, so then on the south campus of LaSalle, which is where the president's house is now, was part of St. Basil's Academy at one time.
Yeah.
Right, well, that was a very happening area in the Revolutionary War in terms of the troops of both the colonies and the British. But that's water over the dam, as they say. So
we'll bring you back for our episode on history in Philadelphia.
Right,
we'll bring you back for that.
Yeah, but if I get a client or a patient or a parishioner who is from that area of the city, I launch into my history of the Logan. But also, because of that, I went to Cardinal Doherty High School, which is now no more.
My alma mater.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm a class of 68, so do the math if you will. Yeah. But, and closed down in
Don't respond.
Yeah, closed down in the same year as North Catholic. But, very active. It was when I was there, 64 to 68 was the largest Catholic high school in the world. Yeah. Literally in the world, had about 6,000 students. So it was quite a.
And you got to do something really cool with Cardinal Doherty.
Well, that's where I started to play music, right? Is that what you were thinking?
Well, you went to Europe to do what?
Well,
I hear about this trip in '66 all the
right,
time. What was that trip?
The trip to Europe was a trip with the marching band and the drill team and the color guard, all together something like 210 members of that, plus the 80 or some parents. It was quite a big deal. It was the brainchild of a priest by the name of Monsignor James Mortimer, who's no longer with us. But he was this big ideas guy back in those days, and along with the band director, who's a friend of mine and yours, as you know, Donald Coakley, put together this idea of taking the entire band and everybody else to Europe for 30 days in the summer of 1966. Absolutely unheard of. Nobody had ever done anything like that from a Catholic school system before. And we played in 10 countries in 30 days. We were there for a big competition at the end of it in Holland. But we got to play for the Pope. We got to play for Princess Grace in Monaco. Wow. And various other dignitaries. And, and plus it was just this incredibly wonderful cultural, religious, musical, you name it. The guys who were there and the girls who were there from those trips still talk about it to this day as being one of the formative experiences of their lives. So because of that musical experience in high school, in my senior year, I was getting ready to go to college. I thought, well, what do I want to do? What do I want to study? And I thought, well, my parents were no help at all because they would say things like, well, you could do whatever you want. They were confident that I could do.
I've never heard those words, but yeah, go ahead.
You heard, stop doing that. Yes.
You said, find what you're good at and try and make money from it. That's what I remember. And that's been very good advice, frankly.
Right,
so.
Right. But I thought at the time, well, the only thing I really love is music. And I was playing an instrument, I played the trombone. And I had an interest in music that went beyond just performing. I liked a lot of things in music. So I enrolled at Temple as a music major, along with a few other people from my high school. So I've had some friends that transitioned from one school to the other, and we're still friends to this day. And from that, I went into about a 15-year period of professional music making, performing, teaching, conducting, until I was in my mid-30s, I would say. At which point, I sort of reassessed everything I was doing, particularly in the musical field, which can become kind of repetitive and also sort of a young person's game in a way because of the hours that you work and the times that you're away from home. And I started to think, actually when I was 30, I started to think, what else would I like to do with my life? And I think I was looking at myself down the road at being something like 50 years old and imagining, do I still want to be doing what I'm doing when I'm that age? And I clearly thought to myself, no, it's not a great plan. And so at 30, I thought about switching fields. I talked to everybody I could think of, my parents, my friends, my teachers. What do you think I would be good at? And same old story. But in my own mind, I thought healthcare, medicine, something. But I didn't have a real clear idea. And I thought becoming a doctor was a bridge too far, a goal that would not be easy to realize or even if possible. So I thought about becoming a nurse. And I figured, well, that's interesting. I'll become a nurse. I can still dabble in the music business. And I can work part-time or full-time in nursing if I wish to. And then I took over a teaching job at St. Joe's Prep. I was the music director there. And at that point, I put the medical plans on the back burner for another 5 years. So now at age 35, started to get serious about it. That's the point at which my wife, Carol, became pregnant with our first child. And suddenly, with a baby on the way, there was no goal that was too far anymore. And I, in my mind, I thought, no, of course I could do that. I had no idea what I was doing, but I thought I could do that.
What I'm getting from this conversation is that there's still time for me to be a doctor, is what
I've often thought about things like that. I have
definitely.
often thought about things like that.
It's definitely what people would
Yeah.
suggest.
In fact, I've encouraged, I like to tell that story to younger persons because I think it gives them, what was good for me was I got a lot of people who would give me the freedom to do this, right? My parents. So I called up the University of Pennsylvania like a complete naive fool. And I said, what do I need to get into your medical school? What I didn't fully realize was that I had no background in pre-med studies that would have been necessary for that. So they said, well, you don't want to talk to us. You want to talk to so-and-so. And Penn had a marvelous program, which they still have to this day, called post-baccalaureate pre-health. That's for people who have degrees in other areas, who want to come over into medicine or maybe nursing, also maybe veterinary science. Get all your basic sciences together that you didn't do before, or maybe you didn't do well. I didn't do them at all in music college at Temple. So I had to do all the 8 basic semesters of, biology, chemistry, organic, and physics. And it was a wonderful, wonderful program. So for a period of 2 years, I'm still working in music, I'm still teaching, I'm still doing this and that, but I'm going to school starting in the summertime. And then through a period of the next year and a half to 2 years, got through all of those courses. And now I'm like 30, how old am I now? I'm 36 when I started. So I was 38 when I finished that. Now the good news was I was a non-traditional student, which means I was a little bit more desirable in a way because of my background. I was 15 years older than everybody else who was applying to medical school, but I had this other background in music and some interesting things. And so I get accepted into Hahnemann Medical School. And I spent 4 years there thinking, well, I'm probably going to be a family doctor, which seemed the most wonderful thing to me. In my third year, my fourth year, I did some experiences in those fields and realized, no, I'm 30. How old was I now? I'm 42. And I love the work. I spent lots of times in family practice offices, but I knew for a fact that I would burn out in 5 years.
Yeah, it's
because
relentless.
And it's worse now than it was
Yeah.
then. 35, 40 patients a day, boom, boom, boom. And I absolutely love the work, but I said, it's not going to work.
So how did psychiatry come to?
It was 11th
to
hour.
be?
It was just out of the blue. I mean, I always had kind of an interest in it, and I suddenly realized it was a wide open field, and I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
And so I remember the day I came home and I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go into psychiatry, honey. And she said, I thought you were going to be a real doctor. No.
We still make that joke to this day.
We
We
do.
do. If something's like hurting, like, oh, my arm's hurting,
Yeah,
I'll call
right.
you
I'm
and
a
you're like,
psychiatrist.
go
I
see a
know
real
that.
doctor.
Right, that's
I
right.
haven't done those things for years, you know?
I knew that if I chose psychiatry, which I actually liked, most people don't, to be honest with you. Most medical school graduates do not want to go into psychiatry. It's not high on the list of things they want to do. But I knew that if I did, I would have my choice of places here in Philadelphia where I could go, which was huge at this point because now you're already born. You're how many years old by this time, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to keep the family moving in the right direction and not have to relocate to some crazy city where I don't really want
That's
to
true.
be.
Med students, I mean, a lot of your future is just decided by where you get into school or
Exactly,
your
right.
residency, and they could be completely
There's this thing called the
displaced.
match. It's called the match, and you get matched to a program. You want to be a surgeon, you might get matched to a program in California, and off you go. And you're happy to go.
And then you stay there, perhaps, you know?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
You move away from your family, et cetera. So I've been out in the field working for 27 years. I've worked mostly, not entirely, but mostly with children and adolescents. Lots of inner city kids. I also work now in a residential drug and alcohol program for men.
So if I could throw a question at you, because we'll get to the diaconate
Oh,
stuff
yeah, the
later, because
diaconate.
most of the time you have been a practicing medical doctor, just being just a regular lay Catholic like the rest of us.
Yeah.
So could you speak to just kind of the role of the mind when we're talking about the human person?
Sure. I'll sort of preface it by saying that, as a Catholic psychiatrist, as a believing, practicing, Catholic Christian psychiatrist, there seems to some people that there would be an impediment to working effectively in the field of psychiatry, because
Why is that?
Well, it's because of the origins of the field. It did not begin as a strictly medical science, and it certainly did not begin as giving recognition very much to spiritual things or religious belief. I think Sigmund Freud, who was the major proponent of early things in psychiatry, once said that he believed that psychiatry could only have been invented by an atheistic Jew.
Really?
Now, I think he was being a little smug when he said that, but he did actually say such. And he wasn't bragging about his Jewishness. I think he might have been bragging more about his atheism. But Freud is an interesting character because he, in his professional work, developed a real antipathy towards religion. He thought it was sort of a delusion for most people.
Yeah.
And yet, interestingly enough, when he was a young child in Vienna, he had a Catholic nurse in the house who took care of him, like a nanny kind of nurse. And this Catholic nurse used to take him to Mass on a regular basis. And he had an experience of the Catholic faith, at least as a child, being involved in liturgy because this lady took him there. And so the smells and the bells and whatever else he picked up. And something strange happened. At a certain point, the nurse was accused of stealing something from the family. We believe she was falsely accused, but she got fired. And she had been apparently a very dear figure to Sigmund, young Sigmund. And there's some thinking that his antipathy towards the church may have had its roots in that experience where he loved her and he loved going to church as a kid with her. And then she got fired and she disappeared from his life. And I don't know if that's 100% true, but I think it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Because he was definitely opposed to the idea of religion or faith in general in people's lives. And that's true not only of him, but of most of the early practitioners in that field. First of all, it's not a medical science under Freud. It's more of a psychological pursuit based on kind of, Viennese, worldly, secular, how you understand the mind. One of the first proponents of any of this was a guy named Anton Mesmer. Have you ever heard of mesmerism?
Yeah.
Hypnosis,
Yeah.
right?
He knows- we should add that you have a master's in psychology.
Okay.
I mean, so he's
Psychological
certainly
counseling.
there.
Yeah.
You go. So
Yeah, so Anton
I'm definitely
Mesmer,
the dumbest person in the
You
room.
want to see how strange this can get? If you want to hear how strange early psychiatry can be, read about Anton Mesmer. It's a little bit off the track. I mean, interestingly, nowadays, when I was at Jefferson in my residency, there were a lot of analysts still in the program. Now, analysts, you talk about psychoanalysts, or you're talking about followers of Freud and those other practitioners. There were several of them, many of them still on the faculty. And so we got sort of a strange combination of modern day medical psychiatry and this older kind of based not on medical stuff, but on the unconscious, the id, the superego, and the ego, and all this stuff. And boy, it was one day they brought.
My head would have been spinning.
Now, this is it. It's germane to what we're talking about because one day they brought in a woman from Penn who was one of the big proponents of the cognitive behavioral thing. She was a person from the Beck Institute at the University of Pennsylvania. Well, cognitive behavioral therapy is a very specialized type of therapy, very popular now, probably the most successful type of therapy. And its basic form, it says something like this. It says, look, feelings follow thoughts. Thoughts always come first. Memories, thoughts come first. And they're attached with feelings like boxcars on a train. The problem is that once the feeling moves in, the thought comes, the feeling moves in. Oftentimes the feeling is so strong, it's sort of the thought's gone, and now you're left with the feeling, and you don't know why. Now, this can be based on misinterpretation, misunderstanding of things from the past. that you've sort of stuck with you, that you can't sort of free yourself from. But what CBT tries to do is say, well, we got to go back to the thoughts. We really need to go back and look at that. We need to reappraise them. Are they valid? Do they hold any water? Are they misunderstood? Are they entirely false? Are they misleading? And so they brought in this woman who gave us a wonderful lecture in cognitive behavioral therapy. And at the end of the lecture, one of my classmates said, well, what do you people say about the unconscious? Well, the unconscious was a Freudian thing, right? Not the subconscious, the unconscious. Freud thought that a lot of what motivated us and resulted in our problems and what have were things going on this unconscious level of the mind, right? And her response to this was short and sweet. She said, "Oh, we don't believe in that."
Oh.
And we were like, "Oh my." Well, there were people there in my training program who believed deeply in that, and this was like, wow, it sounds like a new religious system or something. Not how to say, but we all got the point. We all got the point. There was something about the older way which was not scientific, that was certainly not medically based, and the strangest thing in the world to watch was an old school psychoanalyst try to deal with prescribing medication for simple psychiatric issues. Right? They just had no idea what to do with it, and they was clumsy, very clumsy. I'm sure there's still some there.
Yeah.
So, and I learned things from them. I'm not saying this is all a waste of time or nonsense, but it excluded almost entirely the idea of religious belief, faith, the supernatural, transcendental experiences, metaphysics. What was all absent from that? Or if it wasn't absent, it was there under some strange disguise that made no sense. So I watched from my training, I watched it go from this kind of older, theoretically Freudian psychoanalytic based thing to completely move to an entirely medical approach. Well, you throw a lot of the baby out with the bathwater when you do that too. So there's some validity here and there. There's some usefulness to the modern understanding, medical understanding. But guess what? You really have to know and learn and live a lot of this stuff to begin to put it together in a useful way to help people. And if you leave out entirely the idea of God, faith, and belief, I think you should put your books on the wall, lock your office, and go home, and just don't do that anymore. It's not a good idea to do that, and it's very hard.
So I actually, just not to interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you.
It's about time. I'll talk without stopping.
No, I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that because as a human person, we all know at least from a Catholic perspective that we are body and soul, right? And so just treating us from a medical perspective, when it comes to some of the mental health issues that we might be struggling with is certainly a viable and important thing. But there's that spiritual dimension, that dimension of the soul. You'd mentioned religion too. But I feel that psychology, psychiatry maybe is kind of hogtied a little bit in terms of how far they can go. I have friends that are psychologists and have their own practice, and they cannot bring up anything spiritual or God unless the client initiates it. They can't even propose it.
It's fraught with some dangers. I agree.
Yeah.
However, I'll tell you who I can bring it up with anytime I want, and it's the guys in that drug and alcohol program. It's perfect. I reach a point in the interview where I do lots of evaluations on them, and I simply say, "So tell me about your religious background." And I wouldn't, I might ask other types of patients or clients that same question, but to these guys, I want to open that door for them, and I find that, they have some interesting religious beliefs and experiences, but they're very open to the idea. I could talk to them about anything about the faith, and I be careful how I do it. Right. I'm not there to sell them, something,
sure,
a system necessarily, but I want to be respectful. But I also want to hear, and I know that they all need to express that, and to a man, and it's all men in this program, they are able to verbalize how important that is in their lives. With other clients, I get people who refer to me because a Catholic friend told them to come or a priest sent them to me, that sort of thing. And of course, then
the door is partially open.
You can fall into the ditch on either side of the road. You know that expression, right?
Yeah.
You can fall into. So
I do it all the time.
We all do it. We all do it all the time. But if I'm going after every one of my patients with a spiritual, what we're going to talk about, no. Or if I ignore it entirely, it's just as bad.
Right.
And I have to let them take the lead to see how open anyone might be to even discussing that, because people have had all kinds of experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, in dealing with their faith and dealing with God and dealing with this.
I have a question to that
practice.
to
Go
that
ahead.
What would you say to those who say that religion, prayer, spirituality is the only answer to people who do struggle with mental health and various disorders? What do you say to that?
Well, what I want to say is I know better, right? That that's not the case. That's not the now.
What makes you say that?
Phrase your question again.
What would you say to people that say, because you deal in medication too? I mean, that's most of what you do, correct? Yeah. What would you say to people who say that's not really the answer to mental health
medication
disorders?
Is not?
Yeah, that it's just it's more prayer. You're not praying enough. You're not spiritual enough.
So we should
not enough adoration, things like that.
Right. Let's talk about the person. So we're all persons. We have a body, right? We are a body. Actually, John Paul would have said, "You are a body, right? You are the body. Not you have a body, but you are the body." And the body, the person, my personhood. The two things are so intertwined. I can't separate them out. I don't want to get into a mind-body duality. That's kind of a bad road to go down.
Right.
And that I don't want to conceptualize it that way. They really are united within me. Now, so what are some of the? If we talk about the soul for a second. So all right. So if people come to me and I do evaluations and I don't just hand them pills as they come in the door, by the way, but I want to hear their story. I want to get to know them. I want to know what they've been through before. I want to get a sense of where they are spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, relationship-wise. You have it, right? All of those things together tell me who this person is. Of course, I am thinking about medications because that's the reason a lot of people do come to me. But I'm also savvy enough with medication to know that medication doesn't work on the level of the soul. Let's start there, okay? It doesn't.
That's a good quote.
No, it doesn't.
We're going to put that in the promo. Go ahead.
Okay, just get me in trouble with the AMA. Medication doesn't work on the level of the soul. That was just a thought that came to me, and I just blurted it out.
No, that's
okay. But I mean, it's really pretty obvious. You don't take medication to heal your soul. You take medication to assist your body, which is in close cooperation with your soul at all times. The two things are working together hand in hand.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the mind for a second too, because the mind is sort of like a secular concept of this whole thing rolled into one. We don't talk, in psychiatry, we don't talk about the mind so much. That's more of like a philosophical topic, I guess.
What do you say instead? Or what? No, what does the field say? If they don't really address the mind.
What does the field say? God knows what the field says. I probably wouldn't believe what they say anyway. But I mean, all right. So what's the essential quality of the human person? What is it?
Oh, I hate you do this too.
He
throws out these questions, and I have to get the right answer. Go ahead. You went to.
Where's the most essential aspect of my personhood reside?
My soul.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It is right.
Yeah.
Because you are primarily, first and foremost, a spiritual entity. You're a spiritual being. Now you're different from the way it works for angels, right? They have some of the similar aspects of intellect and will and memory, etc. But memory, I don't know what angels have for memory, but I guess they have a memory. But in my case, it's complicated by my body. Now, let me tell you what Thomas More didn't actually say, but somebody else said he said, and that would be Robert Bolt, who wrote.
Is it still attributed to Thomas More?
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay.
It's a line from the play. So, but I don't think Thomas would have had
Man for
any
All
problem.
Seasons?
Yeah.
So Man for All Seasons, Thomas More is slowly being constrained by the King of England and by the Cromwell and etc. And he's either going to cast his vote in favor of the king and his desired marriage, or he's not. And if he doesn't, the problems are going to get worse and worse and worse. Of course, he loses his head over this in the end. But in the play, there's a scene where he's returned from the castle after being interrogated, and even the boatmen won't take him back. They've been told, don't take this guy back to his house in Chelsea. So he has to walk back from the palace to wherever the palace was, back to his home in Chelsea, through the woods, along the riverbank in the dark. And along the way, he meets his daughter, Margaret. And Margaret is his beloved child. She's smart as a whip, and she's in tune with what's going on with him. And so he meets her, and she's upset because she's heard about the oath that they're going to have to take if they want to save their lives, right? And his response to her is, tell me what it says. What are the words? Give me the words. And she says, well, I can't. He says, you got to tell me this, because if there's a way to take this oath and not jeopardize my soul, I'll do it. He says, and then he says this to Margaret. He says, God made the angels to show him splendor, as he made animals for their innocence and plants for their simplicity. But man he made to serve him wittily in the tangle of his mind. So I read that whole cry. Right?
I know. I do that frequently.
Right, so,
do you see the family resemblance? Do you see it?
I can't quote scripture from the Embo without crying. Sometimes it's terrible. So
good thing.
I have to recover myself, and because I'm a sentimental guy. But anyway,
say the end. Say that last line one more time.
But man he made to serve him wittily in the tangle of his mind. So my soul is my essential essence the essential essence of my personhood. It's sort of housed, if you will, within this body. The two things are inseparable, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they become separable when you die, but right now they're inseparable. And I had to remember that when my mother-in-law got very ill at the end of her life. She was in a coma for 3 months, and we stayed with her in the hospital day and night, etc. And I kept having to remind myself, she's unconscious, but her soul is intact. Or if I see someone who suffers from a cognitive disability, I remind myself of the same thing. If I see a kid with Down syndrome, I remind myself of the same thing. That's not about the soul. That's just all I can see. All right. So now Thomas is actually talking about the mind here, but we have to use what we have physically to serve God, to go to work, to teach our children, to raise a family, but our mind, which involves our intellect, will, and memory, are those three essential. Actually, Aquinas says those are the three essential qualities of the soul. He says, right, and they're always in operation, no matter what. My intellect, my will, and my memory. That's what Thomas is talking about here. He's talking about this. He had a wonderful mind. He had a great, clear-thinking jurist's mind. He was the Lord Chancellor of England, and he was in a bind, but he still knew that he had to use whatever he had left to try and continue to live as a Christian, loving God, and serve his king, as he said even on the scaffold. I am the king's good servant, but God's first. That it's a tangled mess is the problem, because our minds are not right. What does Shakespeare say in Henry V? He has the king say, "All will be," in the eve of the battle of Agincourt, he says, "All will be well if our minds are right." And St. Paul says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So it's what we have to work with, and it has those three essential qualities of intellect, memory, and will. Now, let's talk about the brain, because the brain is something different, right? The brain is the organ and the agency through which all of this mysteriously works, but it runs into trouble, right? So people have trouble in the areas of thought and feeling and behavior and maybe a few other things. And so they through their life, they reach a certain difficulty, and they struggle with anxiety, they struggle with depression, or in some extreme cases, even with psychosis.
Chemical imbalances, whatever that means. I mean, that's we think there must be some imbalance, or it's interesting you mentioned that, Dennis, because that's the easy shorthand, for understanding what the role of medication. We assume there's a chemical imbalance, but there's no way to know that that's true. In other words, you can't. I'll give you one simple example. We talk about medicines which help in depression. They're called serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and what they do is they make the brain produce more serotonin. So we'd think that if we could actually measure the level of serotonin in the brain and see how it goes up, down, or sideways, we would know it. We'd correct that imbalance. All of that is a false construct. There really is no such thing as a chemical imbalance, because there's no way to verify.
There's no control that you have. Is that kind of
what
you're saying? There's no way to measure it against
you can't assess
what you have. Okay.
You can't measure levels of serotonin in the brain.
But when people take something like an SSRI, they get better.
But we don't know why. You can look it up yourself. Google it. Google, I'll give you an example here. I'll pull it out of the Seroquel. A lot of people are taking Seroquel these days, right? Go to say, well, how does this work? And they'll say, the exact mechanism of Seroquel's working is not well understood. Every medicine in psychiatry says that. Lithium, same thing. Prozac, same thing.
But you're saying that when certain people take it, they get better. Therefore, it seems to correct what is not.
It seems to.
It seems to balance out what may be imbalanced. Just kind of maybe where you get the link.
I could take you deeper into that, but it's neither here nor there. Those ways of thinking about it are more for the benefit of the clinician than they are for the patient. In the same way that the idea of diagnostic categories is more for the benefit of the clinician than it is for the patient. And I'll tell you why. So on the table here in front of me, I'm going to draw a large scale from left to right, okay? And at this halfway point, I'm going to call this depression. Over here, I'm going to call this anxiety. I'm going to call this PTSD. I'm going to call this cognitive limitation. I'm going to call it whatever. But it's not like that in real terms. I could do Venn diagrams for you, but it's not going to, like Kamala Harris or something. No, we're going to do the Venn diagrams. But
We'll edit that out.
no, she's
like, I love
Venn diagrams.
Venn.
Well, I do
make
too.
the edit.
It's the one thing that Kamala and I haven't. Kamala and I haven't in common is Venn diagrams. There's so much overlap among all these areas. You can't find a person who's suffering from depression who doesn't suffer from some anxiety as well, and maybe a few other problems. So there's a lot of overlap. And so, again, the idea of diagnostic certainty is more for the benefit of the clinician than it is for the patient.
So you're saying that the mind is really connected to the soul. The brain has more to do with...
The brain is the agency through which we experience our personhood. Unless you believe that it's dropping out of the ether into your life, right? From nowhere, like fairy dust, right? On your head. It doesn't work like that, right?
And you would not say that about the mind?
Aquinas said, there is nothing in the mind, in the intellect, excuse me, there is nothing in the intellect which has not entered first through the senses. You've got 5 senses: taste, touch, sight, sound, smell. Everything that enters your intellect, right? Unless you believe in I don't know what else you would believe in. Everything you know came into your mind, your brain, if you will. I don't think he knew what the brain was doing necessarily, but he would have called it the mind. But it's everything that enters into your mind, into your intellect, has to enter through the senses. How else is it going to enter?
Yeah.
Right? That's good news and bad news, I guess, depending on your point of view. But it's true. It is true. So the person that we become, with all that intellect, will, and memory, all that stuff happens based on our sensory experiences. Because it can't happen any other way. Now, that's not to say that God can't intervene and make things happen, but generally speaking, I think you have to accept that as, if Aquinas accepted it as true, I'll buy that. I'll buy that theory as well. Right? So people come in and they say, well, I'm suffering from depression. I got a call from a lady just yesterday who's in her 80s, suffering a great deal, lost her husband a year ago, has been through lung cancer, COPD, heart, every medical thing you can imagine, and she's depressed. Well, she has all sorts of reasons to feel that way, right? Yeah. Losses, being elderly, loss of function, and so I started immediately thinking about what would be good for her. But I already knew this lady a little bit, and I knew that one of the real issues she was dealing with was a problem with her faith. Just because I had heard by talking to other people and by a little bit of her talking to me in the past, I knew she was struggling with her relationship with the church. I knew there had been some awful experiences for her in the past having to do with the church. And so I'm thinking about, well, she probably would benefit from treatment with a little antidepressant, no question about that. And I would have to be careful with it because she's elderly, she's got a lot of medical problems. But I think what I thought she really needed was to talk to a priest. And as it turns out, we had a priest friend in common that she actually felt very comfortable with. And I got him to visit her today. It was like magic. It was great. It was wonderful. And, I'll prescribe the antidepressant for her. But she's so ill. She's been in the hospital, she told me, 4 times since March with bad COPD episodes. And I think she figured, I could die any minute. Now, the good news is she's living with her family. They take good care of her and all that. But she's depressed, and she's, if there is such a thing as spiritual depression, I think she had that going on too. And so the priest came to her today, and I know the priest very well. I'm sure it helped her. Helped her. So these things have to work together to be truly effective. And God would not have it. I mean, if you search the Gospels, you'll find this same thing, right? People who are described as being possessed of demons, particularly the guy who's wandering around the tombs, gashing himself with stones and breaking the chains, and they can't tie him down, and everybody's afraid of him. And Christ casts out the demon. The next thing he's sitting there is fully clothed in his right mind. And everybody's like, what the heck happened? Well, that's the intervention of God in his life. But if he could restore eyesight to a blind person, Christ can also can and did restore normal mental and emotional function to people who were either possessed by demons or deranged for other reasons, right? Yeah. It happens repeatedly. And so that's good news. So should we leave out the need for spiritual healing? Of course not. Not if we're believers, not if we're really believers.
But you wouldn't say that, I mean, I hear it a lot. I hear, that it's just the easy way out. Kind of, medication would be like, you're just not believing, you're not thinking about the right things, you're not focused on salvation, you're not, what do you think about that?
What they've studied, the idea of treating common mental health problems with medication alone, or treating the same problem in a similar group of people with therapy alone. And then they've looked at a similar group where they've used both. And the evidence is always the same. The combination of the two is always better than either one alone. Now, that's just from a secular, medical, psychological point of view. That has nothing to do with the spiritual thing. We think of three things in psychiatry that always have to be addressed. It was a model that was developed long ago. Biopsychosocial, so biological influences in a person who's got a problem. I always like to say social second. Social influences, what are the circumstances of their life? And then psychological influences, everybody's mind is trying to make things balance out somehow, for better or for worse. Sometimes we could take each one of those. Let's look biological first. So people have biological problems. Genetic issues. There are things that run in families. There are, and to some degree that's true of mental problems or psychiatric illness as well. Not in every case, but I'll give you an extreme case. The thing that we call schizophrenia, which is a very severe mental health problem, involves psychotic experiences and deterioration in function over a long period of time. Usually has its onset between the age of 15 and 20, 15, 25, something like that. It's out there. I've seen it. And to some extent also severe bipolar disorder, which mimics that. They can look exactly the same. If you study twins, if you study families, you see, yes, you have a certain percentage risk of developing the same thing if you have a first-degree relative who has had those problems, right? So, example, if you have a parent, one of whom was schizophrenic, you have a higher risk of developing that problem. Because why? Because it's a biological problem, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily. I mean, Freud would have said you become schizophrenic because your mother was cold and distant and your father was overbearing. But honestly, I mean, that's. I'm boiling it down to something really sounding simple, but that's what he would have said. It's not about. He didn't know about the brain. He didn't know about dopamine transmission in the brain. He didn't know about the fact that this is considered to be a deteriorating problem over the course of a lifetime. So I guess you could say he did the best he could, but it wasn't really good, because he would tag people with, the problems in their upbringing when in fact they had a fundamentally biological problem. Okay, so biological influences, genetic influences are very powerful. In a sense, they can trump the other two categories. But you have to take them seriously.
It's the cards that you're just kind of dealt. You're talking about.
Well, we know that for men, the risk of alcoholism runs among the men in families. That's pretty well understood now, and certain other psychiatric problems or behavioral problems. Yeah. And there have been, they're always looking for the gene which causes a problem, right? So they haven't been able to find too many of them, but one of them they had was a thing called the gene for thrill-seeking behavior. People who like to jump out of airplanes with parachutes and skydive off of this and that, and to do all the Red Bull people, they probably all share this gene. They do, because it's been studied, and there is such a thing as a thrill-seeking.
Do we have a roller coaster gene? Is that what you've transmitted to me?
I mean, but roller coasters are. Not everybody who rides a roller coaster wants to jump out of an airplane with a parachute on. So.
I don't even want to ride roller coasters.
You don't even want to ride roller coasters. If I could just say, there was one story from probably when I was in high school where we're at Dorney Park.
Oh yes.
Dad loved to videotape.
Oh yeah.
In the front car. In the front car of. It may have been the Comet. It was probably Hershey.
No, it was the Thunderhawk.
It was the Thunderhawk. There you go. And so we're going up this older wooden roller coaster.
Yeah,
my dad's there,
hill,
thinking
right.
no one is seeing his camera, and we get up to the top. It stops.
The
Sir, could you put your camera away? And we have an entire car full of people. We really did, and we were. And then it was hilarious. But we have it on tape.
Well, I have a better story
great
than that.
Moment.
We were at Hershey Park when you were a little kid. And I was determined I was going to ride the Comet. Now, Mom won't ride it. You guys were too young to ride it. But I wasn't going to go to Hershey Park and not ride the Comet. It's one of the great wooden roller coasters. So I had to lie. I had to say, I have to go find the men's room or something like that. And literally, I sneaked away for about 10 minutes and rode the Comet and came back and never told her.
Well, it's out now.
It's out now, yeah.
Well, I think you actually knew that story. But I was not going to leave without riding that roller coaster. So, all right, so we talked about genetics, right?
Yes.
Now, social factors, huge, right? What were the circumstances of your birth, your early life, which are very powerful, your upbringing in your family? I mean, I go through this with every patient all day long, every day. Tell me your story. Who raised you? What were they like? How did they treat you? Was there any traumatic experience? Was there any abuse, of course? And so among the social experiences are your education, your relationships, your legal history, your drug and alcohol history, everything, right? Yeah. And so those are the pillars of your life, so to speak. And then psychological. What are the psychological influences? How does your brain balance this out so that you can keep going forward, which is what everybody's trying to do all the time. Every decision we make, we think is going to be to our benefit. It's going to move us to the direction we want to go. Now, that's true of Mother Teresa working with the poor in Calcutta. It's true with the heroin addict in Kensington right now. You know, they're doing the next thing they choose to do. I think it's going to relieve some pain. It's going to it'll be good. Quote Mark's good. Everybody else may look at it and say that's insane. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be on the street in Kensington shooting heroin in your arm. But you know that's sort of that's the psychology. We're made to make things balanced so that we can move forward. And when that breaks down, then we end up going to see someone who we hope can help us. Right? It might be a therapist for talk therapy. It might be a doctor, etc. But I left out the fourth thing, which is spirituality. Right? Biopsychosocial spiritual. Now, would I start by asking people about their spiritual influences first? Probably not. I might want to get through a lot of the other stuff, really the biological and the social. And then I would include the spiritual sort of within the social or separately, but I want to know about that, right? I want to know about that.
Well, I think this whole conversation is really relevant because the latest stat that I could find was in 2021, 1 in 5 U.S. adults claim that they struggle mentally in some way.
Sure, no surprise.
Ranging from things that are more mild to more severe, some of the things that you're talking about.
I would think it's also culturally related in the sense that if you go back 200 years, and everybody's working on the farm somewhere out in the countryside, not living in the big cities, not under the pressures that people feel in the cities. That more harmonious life with nature, etc. It doesn't solve all your problems.
Getting
for
to
you,
bed early.
More family oriented.
What's that like?
I know.
Well, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
More connection to now. Everything's fragmented. Families move away. You got to drive into, God forbid, Center City to work. It's time pressures,
Well, the social support isn't there like it was anymore.
Absolutely.
Because the families are fragmented, and even when we go to communicate today, even like I was just thinking about this the other day with some of my friends. I'll text them several times maybe during the month, but when was the last time that I actually talked to them on the phone, or maybe got together to hang out and do dinner? So there is this kind of detachment.
Isolated.
Yeah, you become more isolated. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see this higher incidence of depression, especially amongst youth, because
that's a very
what do you think's going on there?
And
you can talk about this too. Both being schooled. What do you think is going on with young people today?
I'm not directly involved in like the school setting. I don't see as many young kids as I used to. Mm-hmm. So I'm sort of I'm now my job is to look at my 5 grandchildren and see what they're going through as they're starting to grow up, right? Yeah. And you and your sister, what you have been through in your life to try and understand where the culture is going. I'll tell you what I realized at a certain point when you were younger. I thought to myself, we didn't realize that the cultural influences on your lives and then now in the lives of your children was like a tsunami coming toward you. That I didn't see that. I didn't know that. I'm just going along. I lived through the '60s, man. I can make but no, it's not that. It's not the same now. I mean, social media is just. They're debating in Congress right now today about whether they should set limits on social media things for kids 13 and under, and now age 14 to 17. I heard that on the radio coming over here today too. So it'd be
it
hard.
Wouldn't be a bad thing, because
I don't know how they would do it though.
I don't know how they would do it either. But I mean, I'm sure there'd be an
regulation
app for that.
is always a tough conversation too. That's a whole other thing.
Right.
Yeah. But they can't self-regulate at that age.
No.
Right? They don't. So I mean, and I see that in my own kids where they'll be on the phone and they might be home for 5 hours, but it's they're sitting there. You take a look at like, well, how many hours did you spend on this app, or looking at Instagram, or
they say the average amount of time that somebody spends on their phone is soming like between 9 and 13 hours a day.
No, it's about 13 hours.
13
is
hours.
The average.
Yeah, there you go. 13 hours on your device
for an adolescent.
So I have a question for you. So we're trying to help kids understand people, but let's take teenagers for example, because by this point they've been through a lot of social media already. We're trying to get them to appreciate the liturgy, the source and summit of the life of the church. We're in the Eucharist. We're trying to get, and there are all these competing influences out there. It's a big show to watch all day long if you want to, And I guess the Olympic opening ceremonies is just one example of that. But I mean, look at the Taylor Swift phenomenon. And I don't know Taylor Swift. I don't know her music at all. But it's a phenomenon. I mean, I saw it in the '60s with the Beatles and a few other things. Sure. But this is bigger than that. And at one point, John Lennon infamously said, we're more famous than than Jesus.
Right.
Got him kicked off of a lot of radio stations. But he wasn't kidding. And that
Now he'd be part of the opening ceremonies.
he'd
He'd be lighting the torch.
we could also talk about the influence of if we're going to talk about spiritual things, we have to also consider the influence of the demonic.
Yeah.
And if you look at the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics, for whatever they were worth, and don't see a demonic influence in that, you have missed the boat. You have missed the point. Because why else would someone choose to portray the Last Supper in that way?
Yeah.
Except to ridicule the sacrifice of Christ. I mean, that's... And the funny thing was, I sent this to you in text. I said, and that painting which is on the wall, which is Da Vinci's Last Supper, right? Which is on the wall of the refectory in the I forget where, the monastery outside of Milan, right? Why is it, the refectory is the lunchroom, right? The dinner place where they eat. Why is that picture? Well, not because they want them to think about, oh, Jesus had a nice supper too, but the meaning of the painting is, one of you will betray me. That's what the thing is actually called. And if you look again at the painting, you say, why are all the disciples going like, what? And they're looking at each other like, me? Who? What? What's he talking about? And Jesus sitting there right in the middle, looking absolutely serene, saying, one of you will betray me. And that's what everybody's supposed to think of when they see that painting. Well, if you knew that, and then you saw what happened on the bridge in Paris, say, oh yeah, there it is. There it is again.
Barron said something to that effect. He said, when he gave a statement, he said, when the enemy tells you who they are, you should believe them. Believe them.
Well, one of my online priests that I follow says the following. He says, the devil always tells you what he's doing. It should be as plain as the nose on your face. Always tells you what he's doing. And it seems like Barron is saying something like that in other words too. It's not a mystery. Once you're aware, it's not a mystery, because things are. What Flannery O'Connor, she titled her short story collection, "Everything That Rises Must Converge." So think of that we're on the earth. Things that rise go off in different directions from the earth. Things are going to rise from the earth and converge. She's talking about them converging in Christ, right? So everything that rises must converge, and everything that doesn't converge is going in the wrong direction. So there's only good and evil. I mean, there's no middle ground really. There looks like we all live in the place where there's this big middle ground, but there's a little bit of evil. It's okay, not too much good, But the fact of the matter is, it's only good and evil. So everything is going in one direction or the other. There's no third choice. There's no indifferent endpoint other than Christ or not Christ. So. And I guess this is what Teilhard de Chardin might have been talking about in the Omega Point. I don't know. He sort of believed that everything was sort of headed there as well. Everything began in Christ, and everything will end in converging Christ. Yes. And so getting back to like the dealing with mental health problems, we're sort of rambling, but I worry that what I might be prescribing for people may be delaying their progress sometimes.
Yeah.
If I get people who come to me with severe anxiety problems, and depending on what the source of their anxiety is, and I give them medications which are guaranteed to allay their anxiety. I'm talking about tranquilizers, benzodiazepines, like Xanax,
Sure.
Am I doing them a service or not? Now, if they're in pain, if they're suffering greatly, yes, that can help them. Have to be managed very carefully. But if it masks an underlying problem that needs to be dealt with, maybe not. And so I have to think about that very carefully. If you're feeling sad and depressed because of the way you're living your life, which is not usually, but often the case, does an antidepressant help you to realize that and maybe take the steps you need to change those behaviors in your life, or is it going to postpone that point? Now, to be honest with you, people who become very depressed are at great risk of hurting themselves. So we take that very, very seriously. So it's always a balancing act is the problem. And so one doctor, this is a Friends Hospital long ago, who I was sure was bilking the system a little bit, padding the thing. And I confronted him about it one day. He was an older guy. And he said, he just tossed it out. I said, well, Dr. Hall, let me tell you, the two main problems are overutilization and underutilization, by which he meant I can do whatever I want if I please to. But my point was overprescribing, underprescribing. Those are the main problems, right? Being overly, if we could put it into other areas, like being overly rigid, well, the other opposite problem is being too, anything goes, right? There's some, Virtue stands in the middle, and that's where you want to direct people as well as you can. The middle is Christ. And we all fall off the trail. I mean, it happened with our ancestors. It happened with Adam and Eve in the garden. Everything was going just fine. And then one day, this thing happens with this serpent, and Eve is looking, wait a minute, let me hear a little bit more of this. And the next thing you know, it's trouble, And the next thing after that, they have two kids and one kills the other. And then after that, we can go on and on and on. The people who believe that the human person, just blessed with enough good government and whatever, that we're all going to become perfected. Everything's going to be just fine. We just need to keep improving the species, so to speak. But it's never, ever happened.
Yeah, we've been at it for a long time. And it's not
ever. It ends in disaster every time.
Yeah.
And we may be on the cusp.
And now we're looking at technology to do it for us.
Exactly.
AI.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to tell you. So I Googled, I wanted to get this quote from Aquinas today about mind, intellect, will, and memory. So I Googled it, and guess what I got? I got the AI answer. In other words, and it was all good. It was all right. But it was the new Google AI thing that laid out the intellect, will, and memory thing for me. But I thought to myself, boy, that's a little creepy, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it happened to be right. No, that's just a machine doing what machines do, But they've also found that some of the AI things don't work very well and malfunction. And I think we're all waiting for something weird to happen with our cars someday, where they just don't want to do what you want them to do anymore.
I remember when that iRobot movie really scared a lot of people. Where is that?
Well, if you're scared by that, then you should go back and read the book by Isaac Asimov. Right? Because iRobot was a thriller, right? It's like, it's cool.
Yeah.
But the book is iRobot. It's by Asimov? I think it is. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other story.
He's very well read.
No, I'm not. No, I'm terrible. I'm a terrible reader. I read that in high school. That's the only reason I remember that. But I haven't read any Asimov since then.
I'll see your Asimov and raise you a Terminator. That's pretty much where I'm at.
Yeah.
So could you...
So what's the future? Talk about the future for a second. Where's all this going? I'm a psychiatrist. Now I'm at the end of my career. I'm not going to be doing it that much longer. But what will happen to psychiatry? Well, if AI takes over that, like it's already taken over half of medicine, because to be honest with you, I bet they've studied this already. If they just put an AI model into the family practice office, and you don't see the doctor right away or maybe ever, because AI can handle everything it needs to handle for you, the outcomes may be better for general physical health. It may be. Because the AI thing, already lawyers are being put out of work because AI can scan all those documents, and paralegals, they don't need them anymore. Right. The lawyers don't need to read anything anymore. The AI does it all for them. Same thing's going to happen in medicine, maybe in education too.
Can't happen in the church though. Still got to call me to schedule your baptism.
That's right. But it's creeping in. It is creeping in because there's so much. You and I had this discussion. You and I had this discussion 10 years ago, where you're telling me that the parish may be on its way out, and that there's newer communities.
I'm concerned about the parish's role in being like people forming connections. Yes,
I understood exactly what you meant, but my point at the time 10 years ago was to say no, you have to have that center focus in the community. And to see a parish closed down, and suddenly the people from St. Leo's have to go to Consolation, and they never went there before in their lives, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a little rough, but AI will make some things easier, put a lot of people out of work, but I think we'll lose the sort of the common touch. There's something about going to see a doctor who's another person, right? You're a person.
Yeah.
I'm a person. You're a person. We interact. The old school.
Very sacramental, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
But if you're talking again, the danger is because of all of the isolation and the loneliness that exists. Right. You going in and talking to an artificial intelligence that has devoid of emotion and devoid of personal intimacy.
Well, I mean,
they'll fake it.
But you'll know deep down this is not real.
But still, I mean, it's just I just don't see how it'll help with that attachment. I can see its use in medical procedures and things and other things, but when it comes to,
it's not going to go away.
Yeah, no, it's not going to go away. Yeah.
So
it's something that the church is going to have to wrestle with for sure. But in terms of what role do you think it'll play in terms of psychiatry and psychology in years to come?
Well, the more medical psychiatry becomes, the more AI would be involved. So the idea of doing a basic evaluation with someone, question and answer, recording data.
Okay.
AI programs will probably. I'll tell you another unpleasant secret. Since COVID, I haven't set foot in an office and dealt with anybody face to face like I'm doing with you right now.
Wow.
It all went to telehealth from home, and it's not going back. So initially, I really balked at that because something's horrible has been done here. Something's going to be lost, and it's true. Something is lost. Now, as it turns out, you can take a new paradigm and make it work pretty well. Now, it doesn't work in every situation.
Yeah.
And I can tell you exactly how it hasn't worked well for me. I won't go into all the details, but what group of patients does that not work well with, and et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is the whole field moved to that. On the one hand, I'm much easier to see, right? I'm more available. On the other hand, I sit in my bedroom and do this,
Right.
make it look like my office, and meanwhile the grandchildren are downstairs bouncing off the walls. It's kind of, it's not the same as it was going into an office, and yet I don't regret not having to drive into town 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
Yeah, the convenience can't be beat.
Yep. So, trade-off.
Yeah.
So let's move into just your diaconate ordination.
Okay.
So, and how did that come about? And then how do you think your ordination impacts your ministry of mental health, if I could call it that, and then kind of vice versa?
It's interesting because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But let me tell you that I
Because you haven't been a deacon that long. I mean, you're 10 years. Okay, 9 years.
10 years next year. But I had thought about it when I was maybe 55 years old. I went to the information nights, and I know you've been through a lot of this too. I thought about it. I started feeling attracted to it, drawn to it.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, we check it out, but not now. It's just like, no, it's not the right time. Maybe 5 years later, I did the same thing. And then when I was close to 60, 58, 59, was when I started. I forget how long it was. It was like 6 years long, I guess. It was 59. I was ordained at age 65, right? That's really late in the game, obviously. But
They don't even let you do that now, do they?
Well, 55 is the cutoff.
There's the cutoff.
55, yeah.
Well,
I would not have made
without
the cut.
permission from the Archbishop.
Right, I would not have made the
Think
cut.
you would have gotten that? Would you get a
I wouldn't. I don't think I would have pursued it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, there was a gradually developing drawing of me to that, right?
Yeah.
Now, like everything else in life, I was never 100% sure about it. So the same thing was true when I went into medicine. I delight in telling people that when I finally got to medical school, I only wanted to quit every day for the first 2 years. I mean, literally. I'm not lying when I say that. I thought, this is crazy. And after 4 days, my first 4 days of medical school, I figured out how can I get out of this and not lose so much money. It was that bad. I got through pre-med. It was pretty easy. It was not too bad. But suddenly I'm in medical school now. I'm now changing my life radically. And I just want to run. I want to run and hide. I don't want to do this anymore. But my dad helped me out. Other people just encouraged me. I said, okay, one day at a time. And after 2 years, I said, okay, I guess I'm all in now, right? After 2 years. So the same was true to some extent in diaconate training, but only at the very end. At the very end, facing ordination, I was like, God, am I really supposed to do this? I mean, maybe. It's been fun. There's been a lot of good stuff over the last 6 years, but holy cow! Again, another big change in my life. But I showed up on the day of ordination, and they ordained me. I guess I think the biggest thing was the comprehensive exams in the middle of that last year. I was just very worried about it. And anyways, kept asking God, show me what to do. Show me what to do. So then I start to. Do I utilize this thing that I have, right, in my work? Well, to some extent, yes, directly when somebody gets referred to me because I'm a deacon, or maybe it's just informal within the parish or among friends and that sort of thing. But I think it's part of my diaconate to interact with all of my patients in a certain way. It's not obvious to them necessarily. It's not overt. It's not bludgeoning. It's more subtle in the background sometimes. And although I do a lot of medication treatment, I think I do a certain amount of therapy, much of it in the initial evaluation, and some follow-up stuff. But I would never be a full-time therapist. It wouldn't be something I could do. But I'm like a troubleshooter, and being a deacon and being like a medical psychiatric troubleshooter is a nice combination for me. And I don't know too many others who. I reached a point in my training, in my psychiatric residency, where I went to the director of the residency program. I said, I'm a Catholic. I said, I'm not so sure how it's going to be for me to be a practicing Catholic in the psychiatric field, because a lot of what we were hearing was how opposed to religion the whole psychiatric thing was in its history, right?
Yeah.
He did a wonderful thing for me. He said, I'm going to send you to see a guy named Joe Vergere. Joe Vergere, Dr. Vergere, Joseph Vergere, was the head of psychiatry at Einstein at the time. So he set up an appointment with me. Well, Joe Vergere was a daily mass going practicing Catholic and was the director of the psychiatric program at Albert Einstein Medical Center.
Good connection.
Wonderful.
And
not
to
only
say,
that,
you've been a daily mass goer for how long, would you say?
Well, yeah. I mean, since before my diaconate, for sure, I guess.
I would say definitely, I would say 20 years, I would think.
I don't even know now. Now it would be like if I didn't go to mass every day, it would be like, why aren't you going?
Yeah.
If I'm not sick or something like that. But that's just me, That's something, once you start doing it, it's like, yeah, this is what I do. It's what I do every day. So not only did I see Dr. Vergere, but he also put me, there were a couple of other Catholic psychiatrists at Einstein that I got to talk to that day. And I said, oh, this is not going to be a problem.
What did he say to you that made you think it's going to be,
I don't even remember.
These two things can be married together?
Just that he had the confidence, and the other guys that I talked to that day were very confident in their work as Catholic psychiatrists. I mean, it wasn't like they taught me some technique or something like that. It was they gave me permission, if you will, to be one of them, so to speak.
Say a med student comes to you and is preparing to do what you've done.
Yeah.
How would you counsel them saying these two things can go together? What would you say?
There's no reason why they can't. I mean, everything that tells you they can is a smokescreen. It's not real. In other words, if you want to be I have Catholic psychiatrist friends who are also psychoanalysts, who are also Freudian thinkers. And I don't know how they do it. In my training, they would encourage us as residents to undergo psychoanalysis. I think one member of my class of 6 actually did that. I decided, well, I'm just around the corner from St. John's downtown. I'm just going to sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament for an hour instead. So, I think it was, that sounds a little spooky, but I think it was the right decision for me. I wasn't going to go lay on the couch for somebody, and I just didn't believe in it enough to do that anyway. But I figured, well, I should just go spend time in front of the Blessed Sacrament instead. That'd be better than undergoing intense psychoanalysis, for heaven's sakes.
Well, I think the beauty of that background that you have is the fact that the Catholic perspective, the way that it looks at the human person, is very different from the way the world looks at the human person. And so, I would think that coming from that background where you have, your Catholic faith, the role of the deacon, you have your professional training, that it's a more holistic approach.
Absolutely, yeah.
Than maybe some of the other backgrounds that are out there.
Yeah, and I know some Catholic psychiatrists who kind of keep their faith kind of submerged.
It's always going to bubble up. You can't.
Well, hopefully, hopefully it does.
Yeah.
But it's funny because who gets attracted to psychiatry? Would it be people with intense spiritual faith? Probably not. It's people who believe more like they did back then than the way they do now, or they're just practicing. But you can't go into psychiatry like you would go into cardiology. Like, oh, I'm gonna fix hearts for the rest of my life. It doesn't work like that. You're talking about the person, the whole person.
Sure.
So unless you're really interested in the whole person, or you just want to make money and run. You have to be authentic to them. You have to be a whole person yourself.
People who do struggle with mental disorders, it's kind of like they suffer silently. You talk about a lot of isolation. You don't see people who are struggling mentally or with anxiety because you see somebody's wheelchair, but you don't see the anxiety as much. You see a broken foot, but you don't see somebody experiencing a flashback, something like that. Right.
I think a good psychiatrist should understand that just about everybody's got something that they're dealing with, and you
all got baggage.
You won't hear about it.
I've said before, everyone is fighting
session.
a battle that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
I've said it a million times. Yeah, it's true.
And you have to see that in yourself as well, Yeah. And people go into psychiatry to some degree because they want to understand themselves better. They just do. That was attractive to me.
I think it's one of the reasons why I'm so involved in the church, is because it's my own searching and seeking and understanding that I want, that drives me to do what I do. Yeah, I can see that.
Who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I in Christ? Who am I? Who am I in other people?
Where am I headed?
We started out with you talking about your music background. How do you feel that music, your medical background, and then your your diaconate ministry. How does that all come together?
I remember my first experiences with music were in the church. And there were things that I loved about hearing. We had a men and boys choir at our parish, and I was never a member of it, but I would love to hear them sing. I would love to sing hymns in church. And I was just attracted to singing and listening to music. So then I get a little older now, I'm listening to top 40 songs on the radio all the time and singing along with them. And then I went from high school, I learned to play music more, and then I went to music college. So that's the thread that ran through my whole life up until that point, and still does. So it's a way of experiencing the world. It's a way of expressing yourself, right? Music is a different language that it conveys things that words alone don't always capture, right? So I'm attuned to sounds. I'm very attuned to sounds, to musical sounds. And speech is a musical sound. And so what do I do all day long in my psychiatric works? I listen to people talk. I ask them questions. I use my voice. I listen to them talk. I see how they express themselves. So for me as a psychiatrist, and I don't think I'm alone in this in psychiatry, I'm listening to the music conveyed in the ways people speak. I noticed this in medical training where I would be in lectures all the time. And I started to notice that certain lecturers just spoke in a musical way. It was natural to them to communicate. Their speech was musical. It had rhythm, cadence, melody, emphasis, rising, falling. It was just like listening to music. And I've always valued that, where there's a connection between speech and music. So that made psychiatry an easy field for me because it's all about talking. Yeah. So singing and talking to people all day, singing in church, talking to people all day. Wonderful. And I like sounds. I've always liked sounds. But it goes beyond that. I mean, it's how does God communicate with us? I could share with you if I had it here. What was it? Who was it? It was in one of the meditations from the Magnificat last week. Oh, it was Father Walter Zizek, who was the guy, he was a Pennsylvania guy from Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, became a Jesuit. He was a gang member as a kid, rough, tough on the streets of Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, joined the Jesuits. Figure, I'm going to go into Russia, I'm going to convert people. So he ends up in Russia, and the next thing that happens, he gets locked up for 23 years in Russia. 5 years in Lubyanka prison camp.
I was just reading that last week.
Oh, he said it was in the Magnificat. Is that where you read it?
No, not with the Magnificat. I think I have his book.
Oh.
Which one? Well, there are two. There's With God in Russia, and there's another one too.
I think it's the second one.
Yeah. So last week
it's the second one that you didn't mention, but it's got to be that one because I didn't know the first one.
I don't think it was With God in Russia.
But a remarkable guy.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull this up real fast. Here, it's from last week's Magnificat. Dang, I can't find it.
That's all right.
I don't have it in front of me. But he talked about the years that he spent in prison in. He was in solitary confinement in Lubyanka prison in Moscow. It was a bad place for 5 years or something. Then they sent him to Siberia for another 17 years or something like that. Finally got brought back in a prisoner swap, spy swap, like a Bridge of Spies kind of thing, where he got released and they sent some spies back to Russia. But he said there was like a 5-year period where he had no Eucharist. And he would say that, and it was hard for him, obviously hard, but he would say, I would say the prayers of the Mass every day, but that only made it worse. He said it was so hard. And then he talked about all the ways that God communicates with us in the normal events of our daily life that he was deprived of during that time. And he mentions things like the song of a bird, or some bit of music or this or that. God has so many ways of communicating with us. I think St. Jose Maria called this the quid divinum, the holy thing, which we are supposed to be sort of like seeking in everything we do. It's there. It's there. You've got to uncover it. You've got to go looking for it. There's a holiness in everything that we do. Well, that includes obviously music. Music is able to, what they say, music hath charms to soothe the savage breast. So it has power beyond just mere words, and some people are sort of naturally attuned to it, I guess, by disposition or by genetics. I don't know. I'm sort of a middle of the road, or I wasn't particularly gifted in music. I was like a journeyman. No, I'm not. Come on. I had a wonderful time in music, but I know exactly the level on which I was performing and the kind of tools I had for that. It's one of the reasons I got out of it. Because I realized, I said to my best friend when I reeled to Terry one day, I said, in baseball, if you're a 300 hitter, that's good. I said, in music, it's not that good. I said, and I'm lucky if I'm a 300 hitter. And I wasn't being self-deprecating.
Yeah,
I was being very honest with myself. I'm good at some things in music, but no. I mean, I know what the real music makers can do. I mean, but anyway, we'll go.
It's humble of you to say
it's
that.
A gift.
You did play in the Philly Pops for like 15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
It should be said, but go ahead.
Yeah.
It's no slouch. To kind of close this out, like what would you say? We always try to give some tips to those who are listening of how to just deal better in the world and be a better, more faithful Christian, be a more faithful Catholic. For somebody who, I mean, we're talking about 50 million people, it's probably some people who are listening to us.
Right.
What advice would you give them on how to deal better with what they might be struggling with behaviorally, emotionally, mentally, and how to deal with that within the practice of their faith?
Well, I mentioned the biopsychosocial model, which is very valid and very useful. Mm-hmm. I do want to know those things, the biological influences. What's your family history? I want to know what's your social. What have you been through in your life? That can take a long time to develop. I ask people, even teenagers, the questions that they say we're supposed to ask everybody about things like abuse and trauma, and I just ask them outright. I have a way of doing it where I try to I don't want them to feel confronted by the question. But I'm amazed at how many people have said, "Oh yeah, I was physically beaten as a kid by so and so. It took place over a couple of years." And I said, "Have you ever told anybody about that before?" I say, "No." I mean, the person's like 40-some years old. Have you ever told it? You never.
Yep.
I'm the first person you told, and all I did was ask you. I mean, it's amazing what people don't get asked, and sexual abuse is even a more difficult question to pose and to answer for people. People have to, I guess I'll say what helped me in my own life. Forget about what advice I can give to other people. You go to get help to learn about yourself. You don't go to the doctor so that you can learn the things about yourself you already know. You don't go to the therapist to learn what you already know about yourself. You go to the therapist, you go to the psychiatrist, you go to the medical doctor to find out what you don't know about yourself. And a good doctor will help you find your way to understand yourself better, particularly in the area of psychology and psychiatry. Now, that's a process that can take a lot of time. Yeah. But it's a first step to make someone feel welcomed and comfortable in an initial meeting so that they can form a fundamental alliance with you. And that's vastly different from person to person. Some people come in very defensive and, make it challenging. Others come in and blurt out the whole thing, without even asking them. I mean, it's as varied as you can possibly imagine. It's a good therapist or psychiatrist job to take that information and try to bring some order to it in a way that the person can be helped, right, to the next step, right?
Yeah.
And like John Henry Newman says, we're not called to get everybody across the finish line. We're called to help them to take the next step in the right direction. So sometimes it's a very small step, sometimes it's a big step, but I'm not there to finish the job in most cases. I'm there maybe to, if the direction your life is going is away from your goal, right? The goal is over here, and I'm facing 38.9 degrees away from it, and I can move you 2 degrees toward the goal. That's good, right? You don't want to go further away, right? Yeah. The same thing is true in the spiritual life, in terms of influence of sin, temptation, and all that sort of thing. A good spiritual director will do the same kind of thing on the spiritual level. The good news is we should all be doing the same thing, bearing in mind that the person is complete. All of those things reside in the person, not talking about the mind and body so much, because we don't want to establish a kind of false duality. Yeah. Even we know that in Christ, eventually our body will be rejoined to my soul in heaven. And that includes my mind and my intellect and my memory and my will and all that sort of thing. So eventually it'll be sort of put back together again. So somebody once said that like the sin of Adam was like the shattering of some precious ceramic thing, like 1,000 pieces all over the floor. And what does Christ come to do? He comes to gather together those pieces and begin to put them back together again, little by little by little. And at the end of time, when it all comes into completion, that's when it will be all completed again in Christ. In the meantime, we're picking up pieces and trying to put them back together again. And a skillful therapist, a skillful psychiatrist, a skillful medical doctor will try to put those pieces back together in the right order, not leapfrog over things that take too much time, or ignore things that need to be done at the moment, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, they don't teach this really well in medical school. You learn it on the job. It's like everything else. You know, I came out of psychiatry. I'd love to tell you, I could give you a half hour on the mistakes I've made. Things that I regret, having said at the wrong time or, used the wrong, whatever. But that's part, you have to do that or you'll never learn anything. You have to be willing to make mistakes. Okay. God expects that we will do that and He'll direct you to better ways as you go along.
What's a word of encouragement you could maybe offer somebody who has family that's struggling with mental health, maybe them themselves, speaking as a deacon primarily, also as a doctor, just what's a word? Because I think people, when they're struggling, no matter what it is, even if it's with something that's just physical, they feel discouraged in their worship. They feel discouraged in their prayer life. Or that can happen. So what would you say from a faith-based perspective?
You're not alone. I mean, basically, you're not alone. You're not alone. So there's a certain sort of fundamental connection that you make to the person, that you can make to the person to let them know that they're not alone. Yeah. Because most people are feeling terribly isolated and alone. The other thing was, in my training, what really, really helped me was, I mentioned before that I was given sort of permission to pursue the different paths that I've pursued. But the flip side of that is I can tell you 2 or 3 times at key moments in my life where I was always also given permission to fail. Whether I was going into medical school or into the diaconate or into something, or even music earlier on, where either implied or expressed it explicitly, and if it doesn't work out, you'll be okay. And I thought, well, that's good. I'd like to know.
Yeah, I think we forget that God can fix those things too.
Yeah, but we're all worried that we're going to fail at everything, Yeah. So just to say, well, I'll tell you one example.
Or that we're stuck with our choices.
Well, that's the thing. Like if you go, okay, I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to go this way. Well, what if that way's the wrong way?
I'm too committed.
Can God not bring me from point B back to point A where He had destined for me to be, and that was His plan? Of course He can, right? Yeah. It's not like if I choose B over A, I'm sunk.
God, the goodness of God is He's got many plans to get us to the goal that we need to arrive at. And this one, I was getting ready to go into medical school, I guess it was, and I had finally revealed to these people who were running the orchestra in Toms River where I was a conductor, because I couldn't be their conductor much longer if I was going to do this. And the woman, who's just a wonderful Jewish lady, and her Jewish husband, who you're named after, by the way, your middle name, you named after her. And so I finally told them, I had to tell them what was going on. And I said, well, I've got to take the MCAT test first. I'm a little worried about that, and blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, if you fail it the first time, she says, you'll just take it again and again until you pass it. And I thought, well, that sounds good. I like that. It was permission to fail. And having permission to fail, I didn't feel I was likely to fail. I mean, I thought, oh, I probably won't fail. That's just an example. I have a couple of those in my life that were very important. We all need permission to fail, and when we need to be connected. And so everything that fosters connection among people is valuable. That's why the parish exists. That's why the church exists. We weren't meant to come to know and worship God alone. It was always meant to be in community. There's always hope, right? That's the other thing you want to communicate to people. There's always hope, and just helping them to understand that is a good first step.
Thank you very much. This has
pleasure.
been. I mean, obviously, I'm partial. I think you have a number of wonderful stories to tell, and if I can ever help you tell them, that's what I hope to do. So thank you very much for coming. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I mean, you always have our email. We can be reached at mmlpodcast@outlook.com. But should there be anything that you wanted to forward to Dr. Bob here, Deacon Bob, as you're known in the parish, we could certainly relay that message as well.
Absolutely.
So again, thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
All right. God bless.
God bless.